Okay, so for those of you who haven't met before, my name is Danny, and I came here this time last year, and had a great time. We have a lot of familiar faces.
We have some fans here.
Huh?
We have some fans here.
We had some exactly right there in the cheap seats out there. But yeah, basically what I started doing towards the end of my time in Zunya was just giving these sort of talks, which basically take on a completely random topic, and random to the point of like they have no linking between them, but not random in the fact that they respond to whatever week is going on at Zunya. So obviously this week is Carnival week. So the talk for today is called Carnival Consciousness. And I want to just a quick brainstorm really quickly. What is a carnival to you guys? If someone says what is a carnival, what would you say it is?
Celebrations.
Celebrations.
Dancing.
Dancing.
Color.
Mask.
Party.
Color. Party. Culture.
Fun.
And if you can be a bit more specific, what differentiates a carnival from, say, a party, a street party? Why is a carnival different?
Because we're a group of people that gather with a topic, like something they want to represent, or they come in behalf of a special like location or
Exactly, so
neighborhood.
groups, collective groups. Anything else?
Costumes.
Tradition, history, costumes, specific costumes.
Money laundering, bro.
Money laundering, yeah, we're gonna get onto that. Okay, so history, traditions, unity. Anything else about the behavior in carnival? What kind of stuff do you see in a carnival? Pagan, yeah.
Pagan feast, also as a celebration of the carnival and the.
Exactly, the body, the carnal, exactly, the body. What kind of images do we see in a carnival?
A lot of body.
Yeah, a lot of body, a lot of, think Brazilian
Shaking.
carnival, a lot of shaking, a lot of body, a lot of eating, a lot of drinking, drunkenness, sex, Mardi Gras, all that kind of stuff, right? We have a whole spectrum. Animals often, yeah? So, one of the things that, because I obviously didn't know the answer to this question myself before this, so I was thinking, okay, what is it that makes a carnival rather than a party or anything else, a celebration, a festival? What makes carnival different? And what I found is that it's easier to define a carnival not by what it is, but what it is not. And so a carnival is not just a big piss up, and it's not a big party of drinking and sex. It's actually not that. What a carnival is, and this kind of surprised me, because where would you guys normally associate carnivals? Where would you think of? Brazil, yeah, you think Latin flair, carnivals, big feathers. Yeah, exactly. Like often, Notting Hill Carnival in London, slavery and migrant groups form carnivals, that kind of stuff. But interestingly, and you said the word pagan, Joanna, carnivals are strictly medieval. They are from the medieval time, and they're from Western Europe, which I found quite surprising. So carnivals, according to all literature on it, didn't exist before the 1200s. So it's not a really ancient pagan festival. It's actually very much a Christian festival. Again, because you think, it's all about the sins and that kind of stuff, you assume that it's not anything to do with the church. But actually, carnival and the church go hand in hand. And so, this is a famous painting which is called The Battle Between Carnival and Lent by this I think Flemish artist in 1555 called Peter the Elder. And what you can see here, we're going to go into a little bit more detail, but basically you see carnival on this side, and on this side you see the church, and they're having a big battle. There's a big battle going on in here, and we see all the familiar signs, right? We see drunkenness, this guy's vomiting out of a window, these two people are obviously about to have sex probably, you've got people doing bawdy plays, you've got people dressed up as women wearing stupid costumes, really fat guy, you've got people drinking, fires burning, and over here you've got the church and everything. So you've got this massive contrast between the sacred and the profane. And that is because, after all, carnivals have everything to do with Jesus. Which again is surprising, because carnivals always traditionally take place on Lent, or Shrovetide, which is the day, which just passed actually, the 1st of March I think, which is the day before Lent, where you fast for 40 days and 40 nights. So, Jesus set the example of going into the desert and not eating anything and resisting all the temptations. And so the idea of carnival is that it's like your last chance to indulge in all the excesses before you engage in Shrovetide. So before you start to fast, abstain from sex, become more pious for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, question, yes.
No, I wanted to share also that in fact every carnival in the world is scheduled 40 days before the Easter weekend, the Semana Santa. And so whenever the church decides that Easter is happening 40 days before, every carnival in the world is scheduled. And at least in Colombia, which is a very religious country as well, the last day of the carnival, which is Ash Wednesday, it's like in Spanish we have the saying like el que peca y reza empata. So like the one who sins and prays is even. so after the carnival and all the mess that you made, the last day you can go to church and then you get your ash and then
Exactly.
and then
You're absolved of your sin. Exactly. And you're taken back into Jesus' loving arm, right? And that's what I thought it was kind of strange, right? So firstly, why is it that Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and why is it in Lent? I kind of had these questions as I was researching, and what I found is actually really interesting. I mean, it's obvious when you think about it, but basically, Lent, if you think about it, not as a religious date, but think about it as a practical date, and thinking about it at the times of harvest. So imagine you've harvested all your cattle and your crop, and you've killed them, and you've got the meat, and you've preserved it over the winter to last you through. Lent is literally the time when all of that meat, grain, rice, all the stuff, potatoes, all the stuff you've been accruing starts to get off, starts to become rotten, starts to actually, pass its sell-by date. So you've been sitting on all this meat that's taken you through the winter, and you're now at that weird point where your supplies from the winter harvest are running out, and you haven't yet done your harvest for the new cycle. So there is this period where people in the Middle Ages literally had to fast because there was no food, because your meat, your fat, your lard, all this kind of heavy stuff, it just goes off. So if we look back on this, Carnival, and we're going to look specifically at the Carnival guy here, Carnival becomes about indulging in all of the meat, all of the butter, the fat, kind of bready waffles, that kind of stuff before it goes off. So it's a very practical thing. It's like, oh shit, I've got all this food in my fridge, I've got to eat it before it goes off because I've got 2 days left before it's done. That's why people start indulging like they never do before. If you're a medieval person, you can't eat meat every day, but suddenly in Lent, when all the meat's going to go off, suddenly you can eat 5 steaks and drink all the beer, and everything's going to go to shit in a week. So that's why people indulge on these days. And to this day, that's why we have Pancake Day. Because pancakes, which you do on them, you make them with all the fatty products of eggs, milk, butter, lard. It's all about the fatty foods, remembering what it was like in the medieval times to have to eat all the stuff before you run out. It kind of reminds me of when I was at university, you'd have a thing called drink the bar dry, where all of the kegs of beer, there would be one time at the halfway through term where they'd have to replace all the beer before it goes off. So they would just give everyone 20p pints, and so everyone would just be drinking loads of drink for 1 week because there was surplus and they didn't want it to go to waste. So that's a practical reason of why people use this time to indulge, to be like this guy is the Carnival guy. He's got a stick with fat, he's sitting on a big beer keg, he's got people pushing him, he's wearing a pie for a hat. This guy is the epitome of just stuffing his face and all that kind of stuff. The other interesting fact is the reason why people had sex lots at that time is because during the period of fasting, when you're not eating, your sex drive also dropped down historically. So when you're fasting, literally starving until the spring harvest comes, you're way less likely to have sex or interested in sex. So people recognize that whilst you're still eating well, you might as well have lots of sex too. So also kind of you begin to see, and then when you think about Mardi Gras and all that kind of stuff now, you can see how it comes from this tradition of running out of stuff, so really pushing it up and then dealing without it for a long time. Something obviously that we don't have to worry about anymore. But the other side is obviously the church. Why did the church allow this to happen? Carnivals always end traditionally outside the local church. Era and I were in Mexico last week, and we actually saw a big carnival parade, and there were guys dressed with, as giant women, women with giant boobs, all dancing outside the church. And we were just what is going on here? But the reason is that the church was smart and recognized that they were deeply repressing people in the Middle Ages, and it was really important to let people have a safety valve, to let people have 1 week in the year where they can chat shit about the church, they can do whatever they want, they can sin, they can have fun, and that will relieve the pressure that they would otherwise be feeling might lead to a rebellion or a riot and stuff like that. So here you have what we call an anti-clerical image. This was a time in the medievals where people were still very religious and believed in the church, but anti-clericalism was starting to rise. So people were starting to say, I love the church, but I really hate the priests. I really hate those guys because they are taxing us, they're fat, they are sinful. Like we've got here the classic, the bawdy priest, the priest who will go and steal your girlfriend or your wife, because the idea is that priests basically did whatever they want. They were a mafia at this time. So here you've got this guy's wearing a beehive on his head to take the mick out of the fact that, you know, the priests have all this, you know, that big abbot hat, but in reality they're just like full of, you know, flies and that kind of stuff. And he's holding a paddle which has just 2 little salted fish on the end, which is the kind of stuff you would eat during Lent. So once all the pigs and the meat run out, you're suddenly eating, you know, shitty little herrings, and that's all you have, because that's it, getting carried by like nuns and priests. And if you look back on the image, whereas everyone here is having sex, partying, doing plays, being crazy, here they're like giving to the poor and they're kind of trying to live a pious life. So you've got this crazy kind of conflict, right, between sacred and the profane. But one important thing to note is that the medieval times was not just a time of repression by the church. Like if you lived in the medieval times and you weren't a king or like a high nobility, it was a really, really, really shit life. Terrible. And so there was serious repression due to feudalism. And so people were like working hard in the land, treated like crap, they had no basic hygiene or anything like that. And so aside from hating priests, who they distrusted, people also, and this is just like some of the art you get and takes the mick out of priests in this sort of, you know, carnivalistic way, you also get people hating knights and the nobility and people of higher rank than them. They're like, well, who are these guys who think that they can just like wander around, live a good life whilst we have a shit life? So for 1 week or for however long their celebration is, they decide to take the mick out of higher levels of the hierarchy at the time. So it's also very much about social critique. And the biggest person of all, who do you think was the person that most anger was directed towards? The king, exactly. The king, they hated the king, but the king, this is why we get born what we call the Carnival king. And this is I really want you guys to hold into that concept of the Carnival king, because you can't really talk about carnivals without the Carnival king, who is not the real king, but a fake substitute king that people would elevate to the throne as a parody of monarchy. So there's a village in Ireland which traditionally to this day, every year at their carnival, they crown a goat king. They literally get a goat and they crown him king, and they all bow down to the goat, and they just take the mick because obviously people were intelligent enough to know that monarchy is quite arbitrary. They didn't really deserve to have all the privileges they did. The whole divine right of kings, God-given, that kind of stuff was starting to crumble a bit. So the king was just seen as this big, fat, grotesque figure that should be ridiculed. And so their way of doing that, because obviously you can't say it to the king's face, was to do this carnival king process where they would symbolically crown something, a goat, something stupid, ugly, you know, it might be a little child, it might be something ridiculous, and show like this is how stupid like a king and monarchy is. And then at the end of the carnival they would decrown it to kind of end the parody of power. So the question I have to ask is like, obviously, like, who cares, right? Who cares about what they did in the medieval times? And I was kind of thinking, why should we really care about all this ridiculous stuff? Firstly, we don't live in a feudalistic society. The church isn't what it used to be. Like, we don't have these same oppressions. Who cares? But there was this guy who is going to be the bassist, who's called Mikhail Bakhtin. And he's a really interesting Russian anthropologist, philosopher guy. And the reason why he was fascinating is because he lived under Stalin, and so he felt like repression, and he basically believed that, well, can you imagine, he was a young guy, academic, and every paper he wrote, like Russian, you know, the Soviet Union basically just said like, nope, they just wouldn't have any of his ideas, because he was interested in mockery, humor, deconstructing power, all the kind of stuff, which obviously 1980s, 1960s, 80s Russia, people were not having that. But he became obsessed with the medieval carnival as a tool for liberating people. And and he believed that the carnival wasn't just this isolated medieval sort of phenomenon. He believed that it was actually like a way of thinking. It was a consciousness. He believed that the carnival is the manifestation of a very real and profound human drive and human spirit that he essentially said. And he believed that when we look at carnivals, what you're really looking at is you're looking at the free and utopian expression of humanness and truth, and that it has the possibility to liberate people from the indoctrinations and oppressions of the world. And so to explore this, firstly, he basically said, this is a good quote that I'd also like to try to retain: celebration of the sacred and profane, which crowns and uncrowns, inverts roles, makes sense of nonsense and nonsense of sense. So, world upside down. It's the idea of somehow we live in a world where these things are the way they are, these hierarchies are the way they are, men are like this, women are like this is like that, everything's been set, and carnival is like the way humans just say, fuck that, no, upside down, everything inverted. And he came up with, as any good like anthropologist would do, he came up with some, rigorous criteria for what makes something carnivalesque. He designed this idea carnivalesque. What makes it carnival? And so for him, the first one, free and familiar contact. So the idea that in a carnival, rich people and poor people, any rank, any race, creed, anyone can interact on a completely equal plane. Everyone is the same in carnival. So that means a rich women can get off with poor peasant guys, and a peasant guy can dress up as a king and be lavish, and a rich person can dress himself down and cover themselves in mud, and all these things are completely done on a plane of equality. No one is better than anyone else. Everything is even. People are anonymous as well. I think people often wear masks, they lose their individuality, status, rank, intelligence, wit, money, all goes, and you get this free and familiar contact. Second one is eccentricity, the idea that it's a chance for humans to express, basically let their crazy out fully, do whatever they need. All those repressed, if there's a man who has a little bit of a desire to express themselves as a woman, they can do it in medieval times. If there's a woman who really wants to, hit people or be drinking or sleep around, or anyone who wants to do anything that they feel that they can't without judgment, in carnival, eccentricity is promoted. It is allowed and encouraged. And the third one, which is kind of a confusing one, but it's quite important, very important, carnivalistic misalliances, which basically means, whereas eccentricity, this breaks down the barriers between people, this breaks down the barriers within yourself in terms of your behaviors, and this breaks down the barriers in terms of how you can think. You're allowed to think differently. You're allowed to think in a way that is not allowed normally. So in Spain, they have a festival where you can literally swear at Jesus. They pull him through, and people shout profanities at him, just for like a few days, because you're allowed to think in ways that are not allowed, in taboo ways. And it links, I'm putting it as number 4, but it's actually the same as this one. Profanities, swear words, being grotesque, disgusting, insulting, offensive, all these stuff. All these criteria need to be met for something to be carnivalesque. So this is a classic example of art. This is, a guy dressing up as a really ugly, grotesque, probably peasant man, dressing up as a sort of rich dame with his kind of cleavage created, showing this idea of inversions. I liked a quotation that said that carnival is a ritual of reversal, about reversing things. Also a good point, that a good key word he talks about is the grotesque body. The idea of the body is always constrained and hid, and carnival is a time where the grotesque body can come out, the big fat bellies can come out, people often have giant penises or huge noses or massive ears, or body parts that are exaggerated to a grotesque level. At least that would be considered grotesque at the time, and even today, like a lot of the things you see, it would just be really big nose hairs, anything bodily, disease as well will be shown. People with syphilis, that kind of stuff becomes shown. All these taboos. this is, for example, in Peru. This is these people are taking the mick out of the Spaniards, and so they're mocking the Spanish nose. They've got these big noses, and then you've got drunkenness, and so you've got the idea of, you know, people making these figures that are kind of grotesque and exaggerated for humorous effect. I heard somewhere that someone said that Carnival is the only celebration where you truly kind of go back to the body, because it's a time where you don't think. It's a time where your body is. It's why we're drinking. You have to be drunk. You have to be just thinking about your body and sex and food and dancing and sweating and everything that is not thinking. So that's what. Okay. This is a quotation which you can read, but I'm not going to read. I don't believe in big quotations, but basically what he's also saying here is that in order for the carnival to succeed, and this is a really important point, everyone has to be involved. Everyone. It has to be a closed system where everyone is involved. If some people are involved and other people are watching them, then it's not a carnival. A carnival is not a spectacle seen by people. Where carnival lasts, there is no other life outside it. During carnival, time, life is subject only to its laws. That is the laws of its own freedom. So for carnival to work, it has to exist completely in itself. One person out of the equation watching it with some popcorn, then it's a spectacle. It's no longer a carnival. And that's a really important point that he established. And so in the medieval times, everyone was involved.
John, that is really powerful. Think forward.
Can you send me the slide just so we can
He was so passionate, Bakhtin was so passionate about the medieval part of carnival that he said medieval folk culture paved the way for future revolution. He believed that it was a carnival, specifically, that launched human consciousness into the Renaissance and beyond. It was carnival that stripped back beliefs in God, beliefs in hierarchies, it challenged, that promoted eccentricity and freedom of expression and ultimately individuality. It was the medieval carnival was so ahead of its time that it actually created the revolutions that made the world we live in today. And he also said that the carnival consciousness is indestructible. It's in decline, but it will never die. And so, with that aside, anyone have any questions first?
I'm loving it. Thank you for doing this.
No worries. There'll be plenty more. Just go ahead. Is there a...
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. But,
you can join the group first.
Carnival consciousness is indestructible and it's in decline, but it will never be destroyed. Now, my argument, and a lot of people's argument, no, this isn't my argument. What I first thought is okay, I think Carnival's probably dead by those criteria. So, I think at first that Carnival's dead. Because I think about the biggest carnival in the world. I think about Rio, as we said. And you think about this idea of carnival's only carnival if everyone is inside and everyone believes in it. And nowadays, and we don't want to go into the whole capitalism and stuff right now, but because of these things, carnival has become a spectacle. Pretty much wherever you go, there are sponsors of carnival. Coca-Cola floats, beers being portrayed and presented, but also you've got people watching, you've got people traveling all across the world, spending thousands of pounds on plane tickets to just watch the carnival. And so it's lost, in a way, its authenticity, because it doesn't really have the participatory effort that it used to have. It's now a spectacle, it's a show. Like so many things today, it's kind of become enclosed by capitalism, it's being commodified. And so every carnival you think of, whether big or small, even the one we went, the little one in Mexico, there's still an element of people trying to sell you stuff. You're trying to sort of see it from the side, taking photos. Not everyone's dressed up. Not everyone's creating this world that Bakhtin believed carnival had to be.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because if you go to this is called Symbolium. It was built just for that. They use it once a year, just for Carnival, and its only use is that.
Really?
It's worth nothing. The entire year is just closing a band. And the people that go to see it, I do agree with you that in the end they're just watchers, but by being the Carnival itself brings this energy of do whatever the fuck you want. So in the end you see the people that are watching and they're this is party mode hard. People are not
Yeah.
people are not sitting, they're
I agree. I didn't think the carnival's dead, but what I was saying instead is, what if the carnival is dead? What if the Bakhtinian definition of a carnival, what if the medieval carnival, the idea of the carnival as the people getting together to turn the world upside down for a big collective force has been killed and doesn't exist anymore. And then I thought, where else could we maybe see carnival? And I thought, well, yeah, I was like, maybe Disneyland. Someone was like, oh, Disneyland is carnivalesque, and I was like, maybe, but then straight away I was like, no, it's not. Because on one hand, you've got people, you've got business dad and business mom dressing up as Mickey Mouse with their kids and like losing themselves in the childlike fantasy. And to be fair, in Harry Potter world or Disneyland, you kind of like when we were in Los Angeles in Harry Potter world, and everyone dressed in Hogwarts costumes, and there is a kind of idea that everyone is kind of creating this little fantasy world where like different rules apply. But you then can't get away from the whole capitalism thing. You can't get away from the fact that it's there to serve an interest. It is not spontaneous. It is created for profit, and so it doesn't have that freedom of carnival. And ultimately, it plays into the hands of powerful people. It doesn't invert power. It actually enhances it, as we know with the whole Disney phenomenon and everything. So I was still kind of racking my brains, like where the hell in real life, in modern day life, is carnival culture still strong? Where does it still exist, if anywhere? And I was thinking, maybe football matches, maybe, but then money, it can't. And then I was thinking, maybe comedy clubs, really good underground comedy club, but again, it's like a ticketed event, it doesn't exist. It's capitalism taking that kind of carnivalistic authenticity away from it. They're spectacle, they're shows, they're not carnivals. I mean, it's super hard to find if carnival exists, but I do think I found one place where it does exist. I do, and I'm excited. It's crazy, but I do think it is, and that is obviously the internet. I was like, okay, obviously it doesn't exist in the real world. There's money behind everything, and like, everything's a spectacle and a show, and there are tickets. It doesn't exist in the real world, let's say, in its truest form. But maybe it exists on the internet. And so in order to do that, I actually remembered a fantastic documentary that I watched last year. And I'm just going to run my own little theories. Please feel free to completely disagree and poke as many holes in this as you like. But I decided that carnival still exists in Reddit and 4chan forums, which are online, kind of crazy, social networky, anonymous, meme-generating crazy stuff. And I'm going to make a little playful example of Pepe the Frog as the ultimate embodiment of the modern day carnival. So, for those of you who don't know who Pepe the Frog is, anyone here don't know who Pepe the Frog is? I've never seen him before. Okay. You've never seen this guy? You guys are spending way too much time in Zunya. Alright, Pepe the Frog is the most famous, or one of the most famous internet memes of all time. He is this little frog that was drawn. He came out in 2010. Let's do this. He came out in 2010 by this guy, and he basically got co-opted by people on 4chan, which is like an underground sort of image and meme sharing website, and then later Reddit and then Facebook and stuff. And he basically became a meme that expresses, as we'll see, a lot of things. But essentially he's a really badly drawn frog that's kind of a little bit cute, but that has, as you'll see, evolved into something insane. So this is like the sort of user face of 4chan. People can write stuff in, do whatever they want. Now remember what I was saying about carnival. Everyone is the same, there's equality. Loss of individuality. On these forums, your anonymity is there. You're a username, you're not a person. No one knows who you are. You could be a highly educated person, you could be some hateful troll, you could be whatever kind of person. You're all going to interact, no one knows who you are. So there's this kind of crazy level of collective anonymity that doesn't exist really in the real world, but it does online, as we know of internet trolls. Now, remember that I said about the eccentricity principle, the idea that in carnival it's about expressing your innermost feelings and your truth and your craziness. Well, memes like Pepe the Frog have been developed so that they can express a whole variety of different emotions. So people will post this kind of meme when they're saying something funny or a bit smart. Then you got the sad Pepe face. People will do that when they're talking about anxieties or depression, or if they're talking about sad about anything really. If you read it carefully, it's horrible stuff. Then you've got the smug frog, which is like the kind of idea of when you're trying to be intelligent or witty or stuff like that. You've got the sad frog again. You've got the angry frog, and basically people have edited this, and he's become this icon for which people express their views online, and he embodies something that somebody was saying. So if someone like was really trolling somebody and hating on them, they might put an angry face Pepe and then write something really offensive below it, and this is like an image that will express them. And so my argument is that, like in the carnival, you have parades where you have, you know, a big fat person representing lust and someone else representing gluttony and someone else. I believe that these memes kind of work in the same way. They're like different symbols of different powerful human emotions. The second one is this idea of the grotesque body, like I said, the idea of showing the body as grotesque. Now Pepe is often edited to be really fat, really grotesque, really ugly. People do this kind of stuff, again, like I would say, in a very carnivalistic way. But then, so we've got the eccentricity, we've got the whole free and unliberated equal contact, but then we're lacking obviously that last one, which is the profanity and the kind of free thinking, the insulting, offensive thinking. And Pepe the Frog, as some of you probably know, has been co-opted by many people and has become an incredibly insulting symbol for a lot of people. Like, people have edited him as Hitler, people have edited him killing, you know, people as racist, people have edited him crashing into the 9/11 as 9/11 Pepe, which was a phenomenon like 5 years ago. And trust me, there are much, much worse ones that I am not going to show. So much so that Pepe in 2016 was branded as, like, legally recognized as a hate symbol. By the same people that recognize the swastika and stuff like that, the hate symbol. Pepe the Frog was actually, by law, if you share Pepe, that becomes a hate symbol. So he's so intensely powerful in these forums, representing every kind of horrible thing: racism, sexism, nationalism, horrible black humor, all this kind of stuff. Also, he's religious, right? Pepe has created a cult about himself, and I talked to you about, and this is why I want you to remember the Carnival King. Pepe has also become a king online. He's been nominated as a king, and this is my favorite part, so I hope you guys enjoy this. How did Pepe become a king and a priest? What was his mythological parody story that made this guy a god, literally a god online? And the reason is that on online forums, instead of LOL, LOL for laugh out loud, they take this other form on 4chan for years, like since the 2000s, which is K-E-K-E-K-E-K, like ke-ke-ke-ke-ke-ke, which comes from, I think it's like a Korean laughter, but it's like an inside joke for everyone on 4chan, has been before Pepe was even invented. Now, as he grew and became the biggest meme of all time, as he became a hate symbol, people realized that ke-ke-ke could be shortened down to kek, K-E-K, K-E-K, which is like their lol, an inside lol for people on 4chan. And kek, I'm not even joking, was an Egyptian frog-headed god. The god of Kek actually exists. You can look him up. And someone said, oh my god, this whole Kek thing is actually, when we shorten it to Kek, it refers to this Egyptian god, a guy overhead like Anubis, but instead of a dog, it was a frog head. And if you look carefully at the hieroglyphs, this is the Egyptian, and this is actually true, this is the Egyptian hieroglyphs for Kek. And people, of course, online interpreted it as being a person using a computer with the internet generating meme magic. And so the Kek prophecy was born. And people went, as you can imagine, absolutely nuts for this shit. They went absolutely nuts, and they created the cult of Kek. And this actually exists, and people literally became Kek people. They started creating this cult of religion. Now, it's kind of funny, but it's also like had all these big nationalistic undertones, because people who did it were like very, very much trolls. They even created their own country, Kekistan, which is, you know, you can see it at Trump rallies and stuff like that, people flagging the Kekistan flag. And so Kek becomes this huge crazy thing. Just like in a carnival, he's sort of elevated to this king. He's crowned the king online with a crazy parody of what it means to be a god, what it means to be special. And the only thing that is missing here, and this is where Bakhtin comes back into it. Remember, he said that carnival is this beautiful thing that paved the way for revolution. So whilst carnivals are great in a medieval time, what they didn't do is spill over into everyday life. It isn't. When a carnival ends, everything ends. You don't become equal after that. You know, people don't. The kings aren't taken down a few notches. Like everything's re-established. A carnival is a little transient world on its own that only survives when carnival happens. Just like, you know, it's sinful to do the stuff in carnival outside of carnival. But where this becomes interesting and also dark, so I'm not promoting this because it's also dark, is that the whole Pepe the Frog phenomenon did spill out into everyday life, and it did have a real world consequence through this crazy carnival that happened. And that happened with Donald Trump. When Donald Trump was running president, the people who were behind the whole Pepe the Frog movement played a massive, massive role that's understated, but now people really do talk about it, a massive role in the election of Donald Trump. And the way they managed to do that is because you've got to remember firstly what kind of people are on, like, behind this kind of, you know, these insulting Pepe memes. There are people who, you know, you would say trolls. You can imagine, right? Angry people, disenfranchised, that feel oppressed by society, incels that can't get girlfriends or boyfriends, people who feel like they are at the bottom of society. And so, just like in medieval carnivals, the peasants, the people who feel really hard done by current setup, they created Pepe, and they saw Trump as their kind of funny Pepe-like candidate that would shake things up just like a carnival. And I spoke about this last year when I talked about sort of a reading of Trump as a jester figure in real life, but obviously I haven't got time for that now. So they created him as this frog, and they even made a trinity where, like, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. The Father is Kek, the Holy Ghost is Pepe, and the Son incarnate in the world is Trump. And that actually happened, and there was a huge forum about it, all these crazy things. And they started running for it. People started dressing up as Pepe. They started waving Pepe flag. Donald Trump himself put on a Pepe badge at some points. High-up senators had Pepe t-shirts. It became this whole crazy joke that wasn't really a joke. And the interesting thing was that to also help it come out and break out from the carnival was that Hillary Clinton, rather than being, just a stupid frog, she actually came out and publicly spoke against the Pepe the Frog phenomenon. And she was like, this frog is a racist symbol and we need to ban it. Like, she completely attacked Pepe and obviously gave it full legitimacy. Exactly, which is always seen as like a terrible move. So both parties were legitimizing this frog as something in real life that facilitated its crazy influence to break out into real life and bring that sort of horrible, crazy carnival spirit into a real election. And remind you of this idea, the idea of celebrating the sacred and profane, crowns and uncrowns, inverts roles, makes sense of nonsense and nonsense of sense. And obviously, ultimately, to finish off, Donald Trump was elected, as we know, as president, and people on 4chan and Reddit and everywhere fully said, we memed you into the White House. Which, to an extent, and to a greater extent, is being really examined as an actual proper factor, because they went so passionately into making this joke have real life implications. And so my last question is, that I'll leave you guys to discuss, what we'll discuss, is I've shown you what I think a carnival looks like in the 21st century. Now, it's dark, it's dangerous potentially, and it's kind of insane, but also, like, so was the medieval carnivals, so was everything. Do you agree with my reading that the carnival spirit does sort of live on in this crazy phenomenon and stuff like it? And do you think the carnival can be a force for good? Or do you think that within the lives we live nowadays, that kind of mass rebellion can only ever create dangerous things? Thank you very much.